Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Goldster PPG. I'm thrilled today to welcome a documentary maker. This is a first for me, Valerie Blankenbyl, who is joining us all the way from Vienna. Welcome, Valerie. It's lovely to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you are, as far as I know, our first documentary maker on this show. And I'm just interested, how did you get into making documentaries?
That's a good question. Most people I meet that are in the documentary field, they came at it from really different perspectives. So in my case, it was that I always thought I was going to become a painter or something in the arts. And then I studied graphic design and advertising, and I studied that for a while. But while I was studying that, I realized I really like moving image. And I started to do animation and little videos, and I taught it myself, and then it just developed. And at some point I decided to make a documentary about my family, but just for our family, together with my cousin. And that was my first contact with documentary filmmaking. And I so fell in love with it because for the first time I could ask my family members any question I wanted. And I realized that if you point a camera at people, you've got this incredibly concentrated space to ask questions, and there's quite the magical space in which to be quite honest and authentic, and I love that about it. And then after my studies in Vienna, I went to Fabrica, which is a think tank that was founded by the company Benetton and the photographer Oliviero Toscani, and they invite people from all around the world to live there and work there. And it was just sort of this artistic mecca, which was beautiful. And there I did my first feature-length documentary about people that thought that they were Jesus. And we shot in Brazil, in Russia, and the UK. And when I co-directed this film, I knew this was it. I'd been wondering about what I should do with my life, and would it be advertising or would it be graphic design or something else altogether. And then documentary really hit the spot, and I loved it. And I went to Switzerland after that to study filmmaking. I did a master's program there, and I did my second feature-length documentary about surrogate mothers in India then.
Gosh, fascinating and diverse subjects. I'd love to come back to both of those. But I think we're going to start off today with talking about The Bubble, your documentary about the world's largest retirement community. So it's called The Bubble. And tell us about it. Where is it set? And how did you discover it?
Okay, so The Bubble is the name of my documentary, but it's also what people in the villages in Florida lovingly call their home. It is the world's largest retirement community in Central Florida. And so my Swiss producer, Dario Schoch from Cat Pigs, and we were thinking about retirement at the time, and realized our parents were thinking about retirement. And through talking to them and their friends, we realized that this life phase can be quite challenging to people. And so we thought about what spaces people that are retiring enjoy being in. And at first, the film was supposed to be a film about cruise ships. And we researched about cruise ships for quite a few years. And when the film funding didn't come through for that, but the feedback was, we love the idea of talking about these spaces that people that are a bit older like to be in versus the outside world or the regular society. We found this retirement community. So Dario, the producer, he came across an article about the villages.
Well, Joe says he can now do the trailer. Shall we?
Okay, great.
Yeah. We're going to try again. Thank you, Joe.
Many of you have moved down here to sunny Florida to retire. Say amen. Amen. You came down here to Retirement USA. Yeah!
When we grew up, a retirement home was a place where you went to go and die. This place will add 10 years to your life.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy.
you could relax and enjoy life.
Happy whatever day this is.
The villages offers that escapism, and I think they underestimate what they cost the community at large. Oh! What makes the villages the villages? They want to control everything.
The villages have their own rules and regulations. That's because they got money.
You just keep buying hunks of land and adding more and more.
This is the fastest growing community probably in the U.S. We know we're in a bubble, but it's a nice bubble.
This is a weird social experiment.
How did we get in this situation?
My impression is not that the villagers are against you. Most of the villagers don't know what's going on.
It's nothing new. It's not the villages. It's how capitalism works.
They have taken everything.
People are working against this, so it's not just us.
At some point, it's just going to be a head-to-head kind of fight.
Thank you very much, Jo. Wow, that is such a great trailer. What does it feel like watching it again?
Thank you. Well, it's very hard to separate my memories of the time that we spent there and knowing the people and the actual film, which was also, of course, a challenge and always is during editing, because you've got all this experience that was sort of alongside filming. And then the question is that visible in the edit? And that's why, ideally, for me, at least, it was ideal to have an editor who wasn't there, who will only see the material and who will tell you what she or he feels. In our case, it was Nela Mäki, who is an incredible editor. And she could tell me, does this work? Does the idea that I had while filming, did that translate? Did it arrive through the lens? Is it there or not? Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'd have thought that you'd have all been there working on it. And I love that idea that someone who wasn't there gets to do the final edit.
Yeah.
So how did you first hear about the villages? What made you want to make this film?
Yeah, so my producer found the villages through an article, and we saw these wonderful photographs in the article, and we just thought, okay, this can't be real. It had such a cinematic quality to it, and we thought, okay, there's no place that can look like that. And it reminded us of course, the Truman Show, the movie, and we just thought it can't be this perfect. And so we decided quite quickly to go there on research, and I went there already with my cameraman Joe Berger, and we decided already to film a little bit and see how that works on camera. And we already found some protagonists or some potential protagonists, and spent a few weeks there. And we knew very quickly that this was the right place to make this film. What was really my first interest was that there are these spaces that are very separate from regular society, if you will, and that our society is inherently quite ageist, or our Western society, I have to say, and that this creates spaces like that in which people can escape to and live in peace and be happy. And that really, even in our first visit in the villages, this became very clear that this is one of those places. And it was visually very stunning, but also the people were extremely friendly. So we decided, okay, this is the place to tell a story about a world that is quite separate from one another, and that has a problem with aging and doesn't like to even think or talk about this phase in life, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Truman Show. We've actually had a comment. I'm about halfway through watching The Bubble, and I'm really enjoying it. It reminds me a bit of the film The Truman Show. So that's interesting that you thought that as well, and that really comes across. I can totally get that, having watched it and found it really fascinating. And you say they don't like talking about aging, because it seems to me that there's all this emphasis on enjoying this phase of life. But then you talk a bit in the film about how nobody talks about actually dying, and that this is the last phase of life for many of these people. What was that like to find there was almost this kind of denial?
Yeah, so for those who haven't seen the film yet, it is mentioned in the film that there are ambulances that go through the villages a lot, but as soon as they go through the gates, they switch off their sirens. And to me, that was really interesting that, that there is, of course, illness and death all around, but people are trying very hard to suppress that. And on the one hand, you can really understand it, because you don't want to hear ambulance sirens all of the time, because that's very unsettling. You don't want to see funeral cars going through the villages all the time. So we filmed with a funeral home there. It didn't end up in the film, but it was really fascinating, because they said they go into the villages in unmarked vans because it's so unsettling for the villagers, to see funeral cars all the time. And one protagonist in our film says, she's talking about her street, and she's like, that couple, he's passed away, and this one and that one and that one, and that's not special for the villages. My parents are starting to have similar experiences where it just is the fact that from a certain age on, funerals are a very common thing, and that's very hard to deal with. And I understand that you don't want that around you all of the time. And I remember when the first time I went to research there, I stayed with a lady inside of the villages through Airbnb, and she told me, it's so great here because my neighbor was having cancer and I didn't even know about it. And she wanted to say, that it's great, you can live and not think about illness, even though you're in a life stage where that is a topic otherwise, but she enjoyed that it is all about being, fit and happy and healthy, and that you don't see that. But to me, this was shocking. To me, this was really sad as well, that your neighbor could be ill and you don't know about it. And then later on, I visited her while we were shooting, and she got ill, and I visited her, and she just said she's incredibly lonely because nobody rings her doorbell anymore, and she can't get out because she can't even use the golf cart anymore that she uses to get around.
And nobody goes to see her. You'd think that the whole point of living there was for that community.
No, not in her case. I know of other cases where the neighborhood that was, around those people was very tight knit, and people really were looking after one another. So I have the opposite experience as well. And I feel like it really depends which friend circle you manage to find there and what connections you've got there, as is in normal life as well. But I feel like generally people move there because they want to still be fit and enjoy their lives, and illness and death are not really part of that equation. Even when you see the things that the villages management advertises with, it's of course, people that look very young and fit and are, very sporty, and generally that's the image that you have when you get there, because people are constantly moving, they're very active. We had troubles, racing, behind our protagonists and keep up with them because they were so fast, and constantly busy as well. And like our protagonist Terry says in the film, this is what keeps you healthy as well, this level of activity that is possible there, because there are over 3,000 clubs to choose from. So you can really do whatever interests you, and there's a lot of physical activity there. So that is, very positive, but it also puts you in a situation that if you can't have that active lifestyle anymore, you're really not part of the community.
Yeah, it's interesting because it felt to me a little bit like university halls of residence, but kind of nobody having to study. So they're just able to join in every kind of club and activity. And on the outside, it looks really fascinating and how exciting that must be. But then I guess there is a flip side, that when you can't join in with that anymore, there is that loneliness, which at that time of life, one would hope the whole point of living in a community would be to not be lonely at the end of your life.
Yeah, but you can already see from the terms of city planning that it's not meant, the illness and death are not ever meant to be part of the community. And you can just see the There are some nursing homes and the hospital, and they're all on the outskirts of the community. And if you had said, okay, we are all about, caring for each other, no matter how healthy you are, then you would have put them at the center. You would have put them at the town square so that people that are in wheelchairs or, can't walk as well, that they can actually access the squares, which is not the case. And it's just very telling how the cities and the square and everything in there, how that is built. And it's certainly not built for people who can't, who are not in good health. Yeah.
But for those who are, it looks like it's an amazing kind of social place. Tell us about the actual geography of it. I mean, it looks vast. You did this wonderful thing in the film where you kind of do Google Earth and you can see how much it spreads over. Do you know how many people live there or how much it's grown in, say, the last decade?
So when we were filming in 2019, there were about 150,000 people living there. It's very hard to confirm these numbers because the developer is in control of those numbers, because the community is spread over 3 counties. So you can't really use the population number of the counties because that includes everybody who's not in the villages as well. But we sort of calculated from the amount of growth that there had been that wasn't included yet in those population numbers, and the population numbers that the developer was publishing. We sort of calculated this number, and the journalist that we're interviewing in the film, she also was talking about 150,000 people. So that's pretty big. It started with 1 town square, so it's usually a square that is built a little bit like a theme park. So each square has a theme. The first one was called Spanish Springs, and there are all these historic signs that say what used to be there, but it's all just for entertainment. They're not real, but it says this used to be the pub so and so, and there was a shootout here, and there was this and that, and
Gosh, it really is like a theme park, isn't it? That's incredible. It's actually made up a history.
Yes, even the people that were designing the community had, I think they were working for Universal Studios or something like that. So it's that there was some a reason why it looked very much like a film set as well, and it does. You especially from a European perspective, you walk in there and you just feel like you're on a film set. It just looks like there's a facade and maybe there are lots of cameras in a studio behind it.
That's surreal. That's incredible.
Yeah. And then around the squares, you have these, so in the squares, nobody lives in the squares and in the town centers. It's for businesses, and the developer is in one of those squares. And then outside of the squares, there are these villages. That's why it's called the villages. And the villages, each village has a name. And you drive into each village and there's, the sign of that specific village, and you go in, and then there's usually a swimming pool. There are the post boxes that you can also see in the film. And yes, that's where people actually live, and everything is connected by golf cart roads. So everybody, drives around on their golf carts, which we really enjoy doing as well. Yeah. And then you have these commercial strips in between, so where you can do your food shopping and your,
Yeah, I'm going to ask, there's a long question. I'm going to start off with a little bit of it. My sister lived in the villages for a few years. I went to visit once. I'm wondering if you found it rather Trumpy.
So yes, it is rather Trumpy. I think demographically, it's sort of 98.4% white. I think about 2/3 are Republican, and most of them were Trump supporters. And when we were filming in 2019, there were a lot of rallies, Trump rallies for the elections 2020, and one of them can be seen in the film. And one of our protagonists was the president of the shooting club, which is one of the most popular clubs in the villages. And they've got thousands of members, and of course, it's all politically, as you can imagine. And so you can see him in the film a lot, and he talks about his political views, and that was very interesting for us, just because we hadn't, ever been in such close contact with somebody that had such political views. And it was, just interesting for each of us, I think. For him, it was interesting to talk to us, and vice versa.
And that was what was so interesting, was I could tell that you liked the people that you were interviewing, and they come across, and they're very much larger than life, almost like caricatures. But there's a real sympathy there as well. And I liked the fact that you were engaging with people who probably had different ideas from the people who you're expecting to watch it, or from the ideas that you might have yourself. But there was a real kind of human interest there. Did you feel that when you were making it?
Yes, absolutely. So our just experience in the villages was that people were extremely friendly, and it wasn't hard to find anybody to talk to. It was the opposite. We really had to manage our time well, because there was somebody everywhere wanting to talk to us and explaining their choice to live there. People are just generally, most people we met, and we just talked to so many people. They're very happy and satisfied to live there and feel so lucky, and they want to share that excitement about the place with you. And that was great for us, in the beginning, and trying to find people to talk to us. And then, of course, you get to know them better, and you become friends. You understand their backgrounds better. You understand their specific situations and challenges in life, and you become friends. And then a political view or just general attitude doesn't have to be in the way of that communication and that friendship. And that I thought it was so interesting, because especially with Terry, I wouldn't have expected that we get along so well, but we really liked each other, and even the whole team. And that there were moments where we just, that were bizarre, because we were so different from one another, and we could still talk and like each other. And
wouldn't that be great if that was happening around the world, if we could disagree without being disagreeable, that
was a really good example of that.
It used to be that you could have different political opinions that didn't affect friendships. I think the world has become so polarized in a very short space of time, and actually now people kind of create tribes through their politics or whatever. And how lovely that you can open that up to discussion and not just concentrate on that. There's another question here. What about which social classes retire there, and from what occupations? What was your kind of feeling of that? You probably don't have all of the figures, but what did you generally feel?
So the community was meant as a blue collar workers society. So they started as a trailer park. The slogan was, and I think still is, you don't have to be a millionaire to live like one. So it does speak to people who've worked all their lives, who, maybe managed to buy their own homes and then sell that home and buy a home in the villages. So that is the most common situation that we've encountered. But there is quite a big range of houses that you can buy there, and there's anything from around $100,000 to $2.5 million if you want. So, but most of the people that we met, they'd had a life as a teacher, or even in the police or army, and they'd had early retirement, so they moved there when they were 55, and then they decided to sell their house back home, and with that money buy a house in the villages. So it's not, it looks quite rich, but that's not necessarily the case. However, I would say it's definitely not poor people that can afford to live there, because generally it's not just the house price that you're paying. You're paying for the house, but then you're also paying for these bonds that the developer is getting from the state to build the infrastructure. And then you're having to buy that infrastructure back as a community, and then you have to pay monthly fees. So it is more expensive than people expect when they first look at the community, and that's sometimes a little bit of a surprise to them as well, which is what the journalist in our film criticizes.
So you have someone here from the States saying, urban legend here in the States says that there are many sexually transmitted infections there amongst the promiscuous elderly. Did they talk about that at all?
Yes, it's one of the things that comes up when you Google the villages. It's the, you know, the STDs there, and the STD rate has been topic in many newspaper articles. And of course, we've encountered that topic as well. People in the villages are very worried about that. This is what you're going to ask about. And I read a lot about it, and then when we went there, we tried to find out if this is really true. And one of the GPs that we talked to said, yes, there are a lot of STDs here, but the jump in figures that they've encountered, because these newspaper articles always talk about these statistics that jumped, they're really relative to the population that increased there, because there was a huge increase in population, of course, because the villages grew so much. So there's that. And then I think it's not so different to generally people of that age group that tend not to use contraception, and therefore can get STDs much easier because they can't get pregnant anymore. So there's no contraception, and then there are STDs. So when we were researching there, we just felt like, okay, this is such it is, you know, the topic that everybody wants to know about. I think this is so scandalous. But when we were there, we encountered that people love to go out, they love to drink, they love to have a good time. And yes, they find new partners there, and they go out and, you know, have a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend. And we love that about the place. So we just thought, okay, if they're having sex, that's great, but it's not going to be what we get all excited about, because I don't know, one of our protagonists, Tony, she was great. She's the one who sings Sugar in My Bowl in the film. And she, right in the beginning, I asked her this, is this really true and stuff? And she was just like, look, there's only so much the little blue pill can do for you. And you know, she even said it on camera, but we just thought, okay, you know, this would be an easy laugh we would get in the film, but it wasn't representative of what we were interested in. And maybe it's a European perspective that we don't get so shocked about, that people of any age have sex and good on them. You know, we were happy about it.
So to go away from I just love the expression promiscuous elderly. Thank you for putting that in the chat. I think that's a wonderful expression. I wanted to talk about outside the villages and the journalist that you spoke to, as well as some of the other people. So the villages started to grow up on land that had been occupied. It was bought presumably from landowners, from people who'd lived there. How did it work when they first started buying up the land?
So the area is predominantly used agriculturally. So there are lots of cows and watermelons, and you know what the one of our protagonists who owns a gun shop, she talks about this because her family used to own a lot of land, and it was, you know, watermelons, horses, cows, that sort of thing. And then the villages came, and it was the son of the founder of that trailer park who said, okay, they really wanted to grow and they wanted to make a big community out of it with a town square and a thing. And so they grew, and they haven't stopped growing. And yes, like you're saying, they're buying land that people are selling. And, you know, that's not something that is new. This happens in a lot of places. But the villages have really changed the area. So people have, you know, don't have their land anymore. And if they stay, then they cater to the villages, which this lady with the gun store does. And this sort of rural life, it has really changed for a lot of people. And when we first researched there, we thought, okay, let's just go outside of the villages, on the outskirts, and see what the people are like there. Do they like the villages or not? And immediately outside of the gates, you see those first signs that say no more villages. And we were like, okay, what is that all about? And it was very easy to talk to people to find people that were critical of the villages. As soon as you get out of the villages, there are people who've been impacted so badly by the villages that they are really trying to fight them.
And so tell us about what's happened to the environment, the effects that the villages have had.
Yeah, so of course, the villages are an area that is much more densely populated than it used to be around there. So you would have huge amount of farmland and one house on that farmland. And now it's like one house after another house after another house, and it's very densely populated. And the journalist told us for the film that the water levels have been dropping shockingly, and that she thought that one of the main water users were the villages. And it's not so surprising because they have, at the time of shooting, it was 54 golf courses. And golf courses do need a lot of water. And it's not just the golf courses, but there are lawns everywhere that need watering. The sprinklers are on constantly. People have pools. There are pools in each village. And it's just, people use a lot of water. So it's not that surprising. And the water usage, the increase in water usage has resulted in sinkholes. So they've had problems with sinkholes, and they appear on golf courses and underneath houses, and that's a real problem there. And of course, the developer doesn't like talking about that and doesn't like anybody to talk about that. But the journalist says that that's one of the major issues. And other people who live in the area say that, the wildlife is badly impacted, that they used to have bobcats and, snakes and, all kinds of wildlife. And because of the villages, the first effect is that all that wildlife gets chased away from the building areas, and they come into the areas where people live, and then they all of a sudden have to deal with wildlife in their living rooms, and then what happens is that there's just not enough space, so
one of the things
elsewhere.
I found really shocking in the film was when one of the women commented that what are mosquitoes? We don't have them anymore. They must spray. And I've been to Florida, and there were a lot of mosquitoes, and I wasn't even there in mosquito season. And I just thought, this is really, really worrying that they can be there in the middle of summer in Florida and not needing mosquito screens. I mean, that might sound like a great thing if you live there, but then I just thought the impact that must have had on the environment to have got rid of any mosquitoes is really frightening.
Yeah. So when we went there to shoot the film, I was there with my, at the time, 1-year-old daughter, and we were living in the villages. And right in the first week, I think somebody told me, don't put your child down on the lawns because they're so sprayed. It's really, really poisonous. And we were so shocked, that. And other people told us you can't, like, when you walk your dog, you shouldn't be on the lawns, and your children shouldn't be either. And that really shocked me. And so, we had to be careful with her. She wasn't allowed to play on the grass. And that was shocking. And then we have that in the film as well. They spray constantly, and they spray very heavy chemicals. And the effect is, of course, that they don't have mosquitoes.
It's so bad for everyone who lives there, because all the water that they're drinking, everything they're eating is all going to be covered in these chemicals. That's really terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into the groundwater, of course, as we know. If you spray these chemicals, then that will affect nature in the long term. And it's not just that, it's also about building in an area that is a quite sensitive ecosystem. So these areas are swampy areas, and there was a huge contrast between inside and outside of the villages of how these places sounded. So our sound man was just, for him, it was such a contrast because, of course, he's got the headphones and he's recording the sound, and inside of the villages, it was mostly air conditioning units and dogs barking. And outside of the villages, it was just this racket from insects, it's just like, and you can see that in the film. We didn't have to amplify anything. This is what it was. So the one protagonist that we're filming outside of the villages, in his garden, there is this, this beautiful soundscape, something that I call beautiful. Of course, for somebody else, this isn't beautiful, but for me as a filmmaker, this is a beautiful sound. And inside, sometimes it was really hard to get clear sound because it was air conditioning units everywhere and lawnmowers everywhere. And, so during the interviews, I was hard to have a sound bite that was clear. So yeah, there's that, and because of the way that these communities are built, not just the villages, but anywhere where you build on such huge scale, you end up sealing the ground. So water has to go somewhere else in an area where there is a lot of water in the ground, so a swampy area, that water will go somewhere else. And so some of the area residents outside of the villages are worried, where will that water go, and will it then flood their homes that were built in places that were originally well chosen for that reason, but now there's water where it shouldn't be. So that was one.
A lot of protests then? I mean, you said that we see in the film, the signs and things, and we see one protest meeting, but is there a lot of protest? Is it just the local people, or is it a wider movement?
So it is a local movement. It is a movement that is mostly residents of one county, that is the county that they're planning to grow in more, because the other two counties, I don't think they can grow in those two counties. And they're sort of dealing with, okay, what happens if they just continue to grow and continue to grow? And they've the villages have impacted that county also on a political level. And they've changed how people are voting for their representatives. So it has a lot of different dimensions. And the people in that group are all area residents that are worried about the changes that the villages is doing. But also there are some people from the villages in that movement that are seeing what effects that the villages have on the area residents and local communities, and the culture and the environment, obviously, of those communities. So they're trying to to bring this issue into the community, but it's very hard, because as you can see in the film, the developer of the community has all the control, and also all the control about the information that is spread within the villages through their own newspaper.
So there's a time when you go into film and they try to stop you filming. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was a constant occurrence from the time we were researching to shooting, that after a little while of filming, somebody would come and go like, who are you? What are you doing here? And tell us off for being there at all. And then we would say, look, we're on public ground, we're allowed to be here. And then they would disappear again and then come back. And, it was this at first friendly exchanges, and then it became sort of more and more unfriendly from on their parts. So yeah, it was a really difficult place to film in, because as we also tell in the film, this community has been built with taxpayers' money, so with bonds that were taken from the state and paid for with that money. So everybody can go into the villages, but there are gates everywhere that the developer has put up, and you press a red button and then the gate goes up and you can go in. But because of these gates, there's the impression that you're not allowed to be in there, but you are. And that's been keeping people from talking about the villages and reporting on the villages, because they're not very the developer is not very happy about anybody making films or reporting on the villages. And this is in big contrast to the people that live there and like to talk to you and are very friendly.
And what did the people who were in your film, what did they think when they saw the film? Did they like it? Did they realize what kind of documentary it was? Did they enjoy it, or was there criticism?
Yeah, that was something that I was very anxious about, because of course, like I said, we became friends with people on both sides of those security gates, and so I was very anxious to show them the film and hear from them, and they all loved it and thought they were well represented and felt it was even. And they also knew from the start that we were making a film that was going to be critical, and that we were filming with people outside of the villages. So they knew that the film would have some critical voices in there. And I think that transparency was important, that they knew about that. Yeah, and of course, there is criticism on both sides, you know, like people in the villages that say the film is too critical and is sort of unfair, and then there are people outside of the village who say it's not critical enough. But the people who are in the film, they felt good about it, and yes, we're in touch, and they were happy to show the film to their friends and family.
So we talked a little bit about the political kind of divide earlier, and there's a question here: if someone doesn't align with the views of the majority, do they have to keep quiet to fit in? Was that something you had an awareness of or not?
Well, during the build up to the election in 2020, I did hear from Democrats inside of the villages that it was difficult to voice your opinions. But then they would have golf cart rallies that were pro-Trump, and then there were golf cart rallies that were pro-Biden, and both were possible. But of course, there are a lot less Democrats than Republicans there. So there is a feeling of, you know, you have to be a bit courageous to be a Democrat in there. But there are Democratic clubs. So we visited the Democrat club. So there are all these clubs and activities that you can visit. And there is a Democratic club. There was a liberal ladies club. And there are these clubs that you can visit, and you can find like-minded people there for sure. But we just felt that they weren't very big in numbers. So we just focused on those groups that were a little bigger and, you know, that were more representative of the majority of the people there. But in the film, you can see during the Trump rally, there's a guy with a sign. There was a Biden sign. I thought it was so courageous to stand there and just sort of be the little voice against that huge rally. And he was shouting at them. They were shouting back. And yeah, I mean, what has definitely happened, but I think that's not specific to the villages, is that people keep quiet about their politics. And that was a general thing. If you know, we had that one scene of this neighborhood meeting where everybody's sitting on their driveway and drinking, and in that group we asked them, you know, do you talk about politics? And they were just all like, no, if you don't want to lose friends, you don't talk politics.
Which sounds like a good plan. So we've got somebody who's written here, it seems very dystopian and gives me a creepy feeling. Yet you had said how friendly everybody was when you were there. Do you think that it is dystopian in some ways?
I think whether or not something is dystopian is very much a matter of perspective. So I can only say what it is for me. For me, I definitely went into this project and into the community with quite a critical mind. I was then surprised about the openness and friendliness of the people there, and the connections we made and the friendships we made. But if you think about dystopia as a model for the future that is not working, then I would agree with it, because I think for the people that live there, this is working really well. But for us as a society, I don't think this is the right direction to go. And that's why I wanted to make this film, because I'm not in favor of separating from one another into groups of specific interests or age groups or ethnicities or anything. I don't think that is a sustainable model for the future, because I think any monoculture, be it in nature or in, you know, in human society, is a sustainable concept. And so in that way, you could think of it as dystopian, as something that I also personally don't think we should, you know, go towards. And I think this is something that I hope the film triggers, is a discussion and thought about how do we want to live. Like, if this is not where we want to go to in Europe, or in other places, then what is the alternative? What do we want as a society?
So you've spent quite a lot of time there, the largest retirement community in the world. You're obviously well below retirement age, but do you think you learned any life lessons from being there and talking to the people? And if so, what would they be?
Oh, many, really many. Both my husband and I, my husband was looking after our 1-year-old, and he loved it there. But apart from that, what really impressed me was the the way that people there enjoyed life, and also how they were very courageous in the face of society and how you grow up to think of age. And one example are the belly dancers. There's a belly dancing club, not just one of the belly dancers, but several.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I was just like, wow, this is a belly dancing club. There are all these, 70, 80, 90-year-olds that are doing belly dancing and showing off their bellies, and they're, they perform at these big parades. So they're really, in front of everybody. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, okay, why do I find this not just amazing, but also a little funny? Why did I laugh when I see these images? And then I had to question myself, like, okay, obviously I'm also part of that problem and part of an ageist society where I think somebody of a certain age shouldn't be doing a certain activity. And it's a lot about how you see your body and what bodies are seen and allowed to be seen and not allowed to be seen. And after that, I was just in complete awe and thought, if I dare to do something like that, doesn't have to be belly dancing, but at 85, like feel sexy and look sexy and show myself in that way, then I feel like I've succeeded in life, and this is wonderful. So this is completely changed within myself, and just also questioning, my view on how somebody of a certain age is supposed to behave, and what they're supposed to like, or how they're supposed to talk, and that has really loosened up that attitude that I didn't even know I had. And I think this is just the wonderful thing about making documentaries, that you go into a subject and you have these prejudices going in, and you don't even know you have them. And then by talking to people that are really different from you and having these experiences, your whole inner attitude changes. And for me, this is the beauty about it. This is what I find fascinating about it. So this was a really big takeaway that I had in the villages, but also, something that wasn't a new thing to me, but it has been an ongoing development all throughout my projects is that there are parallel realities that people live in, and that because of those parallel realities, there are parallel truths that can be equally true to the people that are experiencing them. And to me, that in the villages, that was very visual, these parallel worlds. And so I thought that they call themselves the bubble, and then that was very telling of these parallel realities that exist there.
It's such a fascinating film. I'm so glad that I've seen it, and thank you for making it. I wanted to talk to you about your other films as well, but we're rapidly running out of time. I am going to put in the chat, and I'm going to tell everybody who's listening to this, your website, which is Valerie, Valerie -Blankenbyl, BLANKENBYL.squarespace.com. Do look on Valerie's website and see all of the films that she's created, because it's really fascinating. But tell us briefly what you're working on at the moment. I know it's a work in progress, but what is it and why is it so important?
So the next project I'm working on is also a documentary, and it's about online hate. And it's sort of developed out of the bubble, because the bubble has made me think about what kind of bubbles we all live in, not just in the villages and not just in retirement communities, but it really made me think about, okay, how many friends have I got that are different from me, and what kind of bubbles do I live in? And then, of course, there's a lot of research about online bubbles and echo chambers, and I got into that topic like that. And we're trying to sort of shed a light on how does it happen that somebody who is a bit like you and I can all of a sudden have all this frustration and hate vent into the internet and into this space, and how does that happen? That's something that's really fascinated me, and especially from a perspective of a woman that sometimes speaks publicly, and and how often is women that are speaking publicly get a lot of hate online, and who are these people though that get so angered by women speaking. And that is what interests me about this next subject, which
How do you begin researching that? I mean, do you contact kind of online trolls? Do you manage to actually speak to people and find out their rationale? What's your premise for this documentary?
Yeah, so usually I try to read as many books as I can, and then I contact the authors of those books and try to meet them and talk about their experiences, because whatever you start researching on, there have been things said and written about, and I usually try to find experts in their fields that can help me get into the right direction, which is also what I did with the bubble and with any other project before that. And then through that, I find organizations that deal with that topic, and with the online hate thing, that is the case as well, that are organizations that are either helping victims of online hate or perpetrators of online hate. And I'm going through these organizations to get to the people that matter for my film.
And I've heard kind of hate trolling, writing all these horrible things to people, as being described as being like an addiction. Is this something that you're discovering in your research? Do you think people are just behaving in a very different way than they would normally if you met them in person?
I think for some people this can have certain dynamics like addiction, but the people that I've met so far, it sounds a little bit more like road rage, where that person outside of their car is a completely fine and normal person, and inside of their car they start screaming and shouting and saying all kinds of really bad things, but it's in this protected bubble of your car, and you feel safe, and maybe you're frustrated because of other things, and then in the car it all comes out. And I think by comparing it to that, we can all see ourselves in that a little bit. I think we're all not immune to having a little road rage or online frustration, and I think it can happen like that. But I think also it happens through these echo chambers that are very powerful on social media, and by these phases of radicalization that happen. So the people that we have talked to often have sort of gone down this rabbit hole of radicalization and didn't even notice that they were in it, and then didn't realize that what they were doing was illegal, because in Austria there are quite strict rules around online hate, and they didn't realize until the police knocked on their door. And so that's to me very fascinating. But still, I'm in the phase now where I still have a lot of prejudices probably about this subject, and the more I find out about it, the more hopefully enlightened my attitude will be.
I also know from having talked to you that you are currently living in a kind of bubble of your own in Vienna. Tell everybody about that, because it sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, so interestingly, this Friday we're having a screening of The Bubble in my living bubble. So it's this completely newly built area in Vienna that looks nothing like Vienna. And when my film was finished and it went into the cinemas, was the time that I moved here with my family. And every building complex has a different focus. So there's a building for people that love music, and there's a building for people that are in the arts in other ways, and a building for people who want to do communal living. And so there's a different sort of spin in every building complex. And when I moved here, in the screenings, I was often asked, how did I think about this retirement community bubble? And I could always only say that I just moved into a bubble. Like, we're all a house full of people who are in the arts. And so our conversations are great, and it's lovely to talk to everybody. But I think it would be really hypocritical to criticize anybody moving into a retirement community, because the needs or the comfort coming from a bubble like that is the same. It's trying to find community, like-minded people, an easy way of living because the needs are really similar. And yeah, I'm not sure that is the right way to live. I think it can be, and I think in some ways you can find connections over different things, different topics, rather than age groups, for example, because age-wise we are mixed, but it's just that we're connected over that art thing. But I'm still in the process of finding out how I find that, because I generally do believe that a society in which we encounter people with very different backgrounds and different education and different professions is way richer than sticking to the people that are just like you. And so theoretically, that is definitely there, but I'm experiencing life in a bubble a little bit, where there are lots of families with little kids around, and the area is all newly built. So, lots of architects living here. And it's, ask me in 5 to 10 years and I can tell you more about how that ended up.
Well, I look forward to the documentary about your own bubble in Vienna.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I love the fact that the chat is also really interesting. We've got several people saying, "Oh, it's my idea of hell," and then somebody else has said, "It's so great to hear that some people have the opportunity to live the full life they want to live in their last years." And I think that's what really comes across in your film. There are so many dichotomies here. There's the people who are so grateful to be living there, and there's the people who, are worrying about the environment and everything outside the villages. And actually, the film does show both sides, which I think is really good. Thank you so much, Valerie Blankenbyl. It's been wonderful having you on. Good luck with the next documentary. I'm going to really look forward to seeing it. And thank you
so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. Coming up next week, I am going to be being interviewed by Humphrey. He's going to talk to me about what it was like trying to write my book, The Mystery of Princess Louise, which really was extremely strange because her files have been closed off in the Royal Archives. I had to go through all sorts of different ways. It was quite extraordinary, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And for those of you who want to come, this is one of our live events. You can actually apply if you look at your Goldster newsletter, but it will, of course, be on Zoom as well. So don't think that you can't see it if you're not on Zoom. And then you're going to be sick of me this month. I'm normally only on once a month. On the 28th, I am back interviewing the fabulous Rosie Stancer, who will be back from her expedition to the Sinai. She's going to talk to us about the things that she saw, about the climate change, the way that it is affecting people who actually live there. And she's just incredible, as you know. I will, of course, be back as well with the book club. So join us on Thursday and Friday, every Thursday, Friday, as well as every Tuesday on PPG. Take care, everybody, and stay safe. And I will see you all soon. And thank you again, Valerie.
Thank you.
Bye.